Ever since the real estate and stock market bubbles burst in Japan in the early 1990s, the country has experienced quite low real gross domestic product, one of the lowest amongst G7 countries. And many economists argue that one of the key reasons and the key problems in Japan is deflation, and that quantitative easing is one of the perfect solutions to help Japan revive its economy. But to somewhat disprove this theory, I'm joined by Naoyuki Yoshino, who is the Dean of the Asian Development Bank Institute and Professor Emeritus at Keio University in Tokyo. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me today.
Thanks. So basically, in terms of the theories with Japan's macroeconomic problems, some of the most prominent economists worldwide, like Paul Krugman, for example, argue that deflation is a key issue and that monetary easing will solve Japan's problems. But actually, in a lot of your papers, you argue that probably the more important issue are far more structural and that require different kinds of policy reforms. Could you explain to us what your theory is broadly?
I think Japan's biggest structural problem is aging population. Number of workers are declining. Japan has one of the longest longevity in the world. So retired people live very long, and the supporting for the retired people takes lots of social welfare. That is one of the reasons why budget deficits are increasing. And secondly, elderly workers in Japan receives very high wage rate because Japan is based on seniority wage rate. Then people want to get rid of all those old people and they want to push to the retirement. And I think the biggest problem for Japan is how to make people work longer, and also the wage rate should be based on productivity rather than seniority.
Because obviously the aging population problem is also in parallel with a shrinking workforce, and there aren't enough people that are in the younger brackets that are in the workforce.
So that old people can stay in the workforce, but the wage rate is based on productivity. It is easier for companies to keep them on working. And one more thing for Japan is we need much more female participation in the labor market.
And how do you think the government can bring about these kinds of reforms and include more people in the workforce?
Yes, I think one is elderly people comes back, and also young people and female people, especially female people who are now competing with male. Then if they have children, many female go back to their home and they stay there and they are not going back to the work. And they often comes back as a temporary worker rather than permanent worker. So government is now encouraging the child care systems, small children, and that is very important for female to keep on working. And furthermore, the female can take a leave when they have their small children 1 year or 1.5 years. So that will improve the female participation into the labor market.
Perfect. And I guess another key problem that you discuss in your writings is that when we look at corporate competitiveness, one of the reasons that the industry in Japan has lost its competitiveness is that in almost the past 20 years, small and medium enterprises or startups have not been supported enough by the local banking sector. Could you tell us a bit more about that and what the repercussions have been?
Japan and Asian countries are dominated by banks, and banks are making loans to various kinds of industries in 1960s and 70s. There was no Basel capital requirement, and also banks can lend very safe large companies and also risky SMEs or startup businesses. However, the Basel capital requirement give them the restriction to lend money to risky borrowers. In Western nations, they have venture capital market and corporate bond market. There are thick capital market, but in Japan and Asia, it's dominated by banks. So small businesses and venture businesses became very difficult to raise money. So we have to produce something new to inject money to those borrowers. One is in Japan, we have started collecting SME database. Then we can classify good SME and risky SME, even though we have lots of SME industries.
So to map the risk of smaller firms.
Then banks are easy to lend money to relatively risky SMEs to charging higher rate of interest and also getting collateral. For startup businesses, about 10 years ago, Japan started hometown investment trust funds, where the small businesses in the region or agricultural farmers wants to start up something new. Then they posted their new products through internet. then people in all over Japan or in the hometown are interested in those new businesses. They put between 100, 300 US dollar. Some of the products, more than 300 people put their money.
So I guess having a more community-based approach and focusing more on the real economy could try to solve some of Japan's macroeconomic issues.
Yes, especially for those startup businesses.
Perfect. And when we look, let's talk about deflation though, because it is a problem inevitably. I mean, what are your expectations now? The Bank of Japan is saying that next year it wants to reach this 2% CPI target, which it missed this year. I mean, how problematic is deflation for you?
Okay, I think first targeting some rate of inflation, for example, 2%, whether 2% is appropriate or not is another important question. For example, oil price is declining. Then the aggregate supply, aggregate demand, the optimal inflation rate should be lowered. Then it should not be 2%, maybe 1.2% or so. I think the target rate of inflation has to be also changed based on exogenous variables.
It has to be adjusted.
And secondly, the big causes of the demand decline of deflation, lowering price level, is a lack of demand. That is one. And also that new industries are not coming in, so supply factor is also the problem. Demand factor is one, is aging population. And also good farms has shifted production from Japan to other Asian countries. And ideally, the new company will come in. Then they will create another new investment. But it was not created.
In fact, one of the key, I think, discussions in Japan is how to also re-attract local companies to come back into the country and help revive the economy. Well, Dean Yoshino, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is a very important topic to discuss, also because the deflation problem and how to deal with it and the quantitative easing issue is something that is very close to home, even here in Europe and also in the US. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me today.